I really don't see the world through a utilitarian lens for the most part. But if you're looking at an event, for example, I know that if I make a stink about how I need to be accommodated, there's going to be more food for me. Whereas if I make a big ethical pledge, maybe there'll be like one vegan dish or something. Like, because
True. Yeah.
people that's the evolutionary psychology of it. Like, don't come and tell me that I'm a bad person for how I eat and what I want to eat.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm your host, Chrissy Benson. Welcome to this month's edition of Posse Talk with Jen Howk, the monthly series where my friend Dr. Jen Howk and I shoot the breeze about veganism, life, love, and anything else that happens to come up. In this episode, we don't claim to come up with many answers, but we sure chat about a number of controversial subjects. I'm interested in your thoughts, ideas, and opinions on any of the subjects we discussed, including your experience with vegan activism, psych meds, and everything else. Email veganposse.email@gmail.com with anything on your mind. And if you value the work that we do, bringing vegans together, helping animals everywhere, consider supporting the Vegan Posse financially via PayPal or Venmo. And of course, help normalize veganism through the arts by picking up lots of copies of the vegan women's fiction classic, Marrying Myself by me, Christine Melanie Benson, and making it an Amazon bestseller. And without further ado, enjoy this month's Posse Talk with Jen Howk. Jen, welcome to the Vegan Posse.
It's good to finally be here. We had some technical issues trying to sabotage us, but darn it, we're not going to let technology keep us down.
Not even close. Not even close. Yes, we have what it takes. We are resilient, peaceful warriors, and here we are.
I don't know how peaceful. Speak for yourself. I'm
Okay,
not in a
fair.
very peaceful mode. Yeah.
Fair. Yes, I can hear it in your voice. So we've got a few questions and topic suggestions, but Jen, I'll first give you the opportunity. Anything in particular on your mind that you'd like to check in about or chat about?
No, it just seems like it's this very I have long observed that this time of year is sort of just I don't know if it's the dregs of winter or if it's astrological or what's going on. It's kind of like little late winter, pre-spring window is just always kind of the lowest point of my year. So I should just really get the memo and hide from the world during this time, I think. So yes, as you know, it's just been like one technological snafu after another, one like of course we have tax season coming up, which is no fun, and just all sorts of things. So I just feel like it's kind of been this series of one damn thing after another lately. And I know a lot of people are feeling that way. So,
Yeah. That's so rotten. That's just so rotten. I know that feeling. My car is currently in the shop. Again,
that is one thing that is functioning in my world, knock on wood, is my car is not in the shop, but pretty much
there you go. There you go. Yeah. Well, it is an interesting time of year. Someone was telling me that the comedian Sarah Silverstein, is that her name?
Silverman, I think.
Silverman. Okay.
Yeah.
That she has a bit about depression and about how she just at one point just decided she's just gonna go with it, like not fight it, but just like fully just like delve in and just run with it.
I love it.
Yeah. So it sounds
Embrace
like
the suck.
right. And I think that's relevant for this season. Things are finally warming up here in Nashville a little bit. Like the sun is out and already I can just see like a transformation in my own mood. It's so funny how real our thoughts seem when they're happening. And then all it takes is for the sun to come out and suddenly oh, all these things that haven't changed whatsoever, but suddenly just don't seem like that big a deal.
Yeah, I think a good sunny day would do some wonders for my state of mind. There hasn't been one
Oh,
here for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. So today is a little, at least today is not a deep freeze here. I think the high is actually in the 50s, which is amazing. So I will
yeah.
be taking Peaches on a river walk later and at least getting outside, although it's overcast, but I'll take it. I'll
Right.
take it
Are
today.
you, yeah, are you in Virginia at the moment or are you in
Yeah,
West Virginia?
I'm in Virginia right now. Yeah. And
And do
there's,
the dogs come with you to West Virginia when
yep,
you go there?
yep.
Yeah.
Yep, I just got back yesterday, so I was over there for most of the past week and had all three of the girls with me, and then we just, trundle back here. So, yeah, but yeah, pretty much for long walks, only Peaches is my companion because Princess doesn't like them. Princess
Huh.
is like she just drags her feet. It probably looks to people who are on the trail with me like I'm just punishing this dog,
Huh.
physically dragging her she just like gets this very slow walk. And it's not like she's in pain because if she's off leash somewhere, like just in the yard here, she'll run fast. And,
Huh.
it's not her paws aren't hurting her or something like that. It's just that I think she resents being on a leash.
Really? That's
Yeah.
so interesting.
And then Lucy is too old and her legs are too short to kind of keep up on a multi-mile walk. So Peaches is my
Okay.
bud. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so interesting. I mean, the whole leash thing, it's one of those things that once I started becoming aware of it, I just don't like it. I
Oh,
mean,
it's awful. Yeah,
yeah.
no, I wouldn't want to have a leash on either. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but they have pretty strictly enforced at least this one park that we go to. And I see the logic there. There's a lot of dogs that like to go and dogs who are not on a leash and coming up to your dog is not a welcome thing usually. So I
Right.
understand the logic of it in a public place, but yes, as a being with I always use harnesses instead of collars, but still, it's no fun.
Right. Right. Yeah. Daisy, my stepdog, has a harness and
Mhm.
she doesn't complain at all. But yeah, I just
Yeah,
don't like it. I think about humans.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, and we have so much judgment when we see, families at Disneyland with their kids on a leash. It's
Oh, I
like,
know. My parents were horrified when
yeah,
they saw that. But yeah,
yeah. So
why
we
is it so different?
easily see that, yeah, there's something wrong there, but we leash our
Right.
dogs and our cats and our ferrets, no problem. So,
Right, right. Yeah. Or it's an S&M thing if we do it to
yeah,
humans. Yeah, it's
right.
some weird kinky creepy thing.
Yes, that
But
is
do it to
spotted in the
animals.
wild.
It's totally fine. Yeah.
Yep, yep, totally. Yeah. So, but we'll get out of the house, and there is a dog park in Front Royal, so that's part of the routine. Is that yeah, she's leashed for most of the walk, but she gets dog park time too to go romp
Oh,
around.
that's nice. Yeah. How busy is the dog park?
Usually not too busy, although I don't typically, I haven't gone in the summer. It might be a lot busier in the summer, but right now in the off season, it's pretty chill. So, and it's beautiful, well, you've been to Front Royal, you know what a pretty town it is.
Beautiful down there. I mean, I find it stunningly beautiful. Like one of the
Mhm.
most beautiful places I've seen, and I've
Yeah,
traveled a
it's
little bit. Yeah.
it's like the natural setting is really amazing. It's one of the gates to the Shenandoah National Park. So it's, got the whole Blue Ridge Mountain thing going on, but just the town itself is very quaint. The little downtown area is very cute. And then, yeah, there's just these nice trails along the Shenandoah River and it's kind of nestled in these hills. It's really pretty.
Yeah. Yeah. How long have you been there now?
3 years. Yeah,
Three
just over three
years.
years.
Okay,
Yeah.
so not super long.
Yeah, not super long. I was in Seattle for a year before that, and then Hawaii/California before that. So it's a lot of wandering
Right.
around. I actually had
Right.
to go in and I'm finally getting around to changing over my license and my car registration to West Virginia. And because my registration's about to expire here in Virginia, and I'm like, might as well, register it over there. The property taxes are lower, and
Mm.
that is my official residence. And so I was in the DMV, and she's asking me, have you had a license in any other states in the past 10 years? And I'm like, Okay, so do you have a pen? Like, we've got California, we've got Alaska, we've got Hawaii, we've got Massachusetts, we've got Washington. So yeah, lots of different places. She's like, "So
Wow.
you move around a lot." I'm like, I've been here for 3 years. That's a long time.
That's a long time. Yeah, fair. In context, yeah,
Yes.
that's an extended stay.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I'm curious where you are on this whole topic, is just veganism and animal rights, and whether we vegans kind of let ourselves off the hook, so to speak, too
Mhm.
easily in terms of not doing what we can to change what's happening to animals.
Mhm.
What do you think, and where are you with that whole piece in your own life?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think we probably do, but even in letting ourselves off the hook, we're doing more than most people. So it's kind of a both and, I think, where just having the awareness and when faced with actual choices and trade-offs, we're going to bring more thoughtfulness and more awareness and just more more skill to those questions than the vast majority of the population. But is it enough? I mean, where is that threshold? I think we both know activists who are full time in the space and not always the happiest people, not always having the best work-life balance or any work-life balance, and still feeling like they're not doing enough, even though it's all they think about, it's all they work on. I've known activists in the environmental space as well, and in the sort of pro-choice space. It's always the same. It's always kind of if you devote your life to it, you still don't feel like it's enough. You still don't feel like you're pulling your weight. And so, at some point, there is some trade-off with you being the most important animal in your life, like your existence and your life and your time here on the planet is valuable and worth something. And so you have to draw the line somewhere in terms of how much effort you're making. But I think you are absolutely right that, for the most part, most of us aren't doing enough. We're somewhere south of that line. And I think there is a little bit of a sense that, hey, I don't need animal products. I've done my part. What else do you need from me? Maybe I write a check once a year to some donation that some organization that I support. And again, that's so much more than most people are doing, but it does feel like a little bit of a cop out. Um, are you thinking in terms of like calling people out and educating on the fly, or volunteer time, or sort of what frame are you using?
Yeah, all of those areas. I guess part of what's on my mind is, for instance, the American Counseling Association, known as the ACA. They have all kinds of official ethics and values regarding a lot of things, including multiculturalism and just values in general. And I'm pretty certain it's not professionally acceptable to be racist or to be classist or any of
Right.
those things. And in my estimation, speciesism is no no less morally reprehensible than any of those other isms. And
Mm,
yet it falls by the wayside. And I guess where I get frustrated too, that even among vegans, the conversation often shifts into sort of we vegans being the sort of victim class, and oh, you shouldn't do that because you should take consideration of my special needs as a vegan. And that's great when there's a vegan option at a professional conference or something, like okay, fine, but I'm not the victim here.
yeah.
The animals are the victim, and so I guess that's for me where it can get confusing, because there's like whether we vegans are getting consideration in terms of people eating animal flesh around us, that sort of thing. I mean, for me, I'm much more like, again, I'm very clear. I consider myself lucky to have found this path. I am most definitely not a victim. I don't need to be felt sorry for because there's nothing I can eat at an event. Like, I'm fine. I'm
Hmm.
fine. It's the other stuff that's happening that I'm not okay with. And it's just interesting because, of course, as a counselor, as a therapist, most clients are not vegan.
Right.
And, you know, for instance, if I had a client who was blatantly racist, there would be some professional parameters around how I navigated that issue. But I think it's pretty commonly accepted that, you know, in some way, shape, or form, I would seek to guide, you know, the client to some light on this on this issue.
Hmm.
Whereas in veganism, it's I I haven't gone there as a counselor with any clients. You know, I
Yeah.
haven't outed myself there because once you let that cat out of the bag, you know, it's out there. So, and there's this whole professional ethic about not imposing your values on
Right.
clients.
Huge. Right.
Huge, yeah. But again, it's kind of where do you draw the line? Like I, in some capacity, am imposing my non-racist values on my clients in some ways. I don't think that would be frowned upon in
Yeah,
some
it's
ways.
both seen like non-racist or anti-racist values are seen as sort of this collective good or the baseline
Yeah,
that all civilization should be, this should just be the
yeah,
assumption. And veganism has, for all kinds of reasons, just not attained that kind of status in the collective. So it's still seen as this little boutique personal value, just,
exactly.
I'm Catholic or
Yeah,
I'm
or I
vegan
keep,
or
yeah, yeah.
yeah, or yeah, I
I
play
keep
chess.
kosher or
Yeah,
yeah, but
exactly.
kosher at least like there is some ethical, moral component to it. So maybe
But
people who keep kosher think that it's morally important.
but it would still be, I think, within the counseling world seen as a no-go to, encounter a non-kosher client and say, "Oh, well, you're way out of line here, buddy. Let me
Yeah,
educate."
yeah,
Whereas with racism or classism or these other kind of big inclusion things, it is just kind of the assumption, and that wasn't always the case. That was it was probably de facto the case when we were growing up, even though that was before diversity committees and the rise of DEI and all of that. So it wasn't quite as baked in institutionally as it is now. And I suppose we can hope that sort of a similar attitude toward how we treat animals will eventually start to creep into that circle of compassion will extend, and we will get to a point, certainly lots of people believe we will look back at this period of history and just be horrified at what we were doing and astonished by our behavior. I think we're a very long way from coming to some kind of collective consensus around that, though. And yeah, I don't know what would hasten that. There's very powerful forces against it. So I think as long as that's the case, then yeah, it's just seen as this is your personal thing. Not everybody sees the world that way, and so stay quiet about
right.
it.
Yeah, just speaking for myself personally, yes, self-care and taking care of me is important, but I certainly could be doing a lot more to help animals. And so just to be speaking out for that more often, um, in the capacity of making it clear this is not for me because I'm some delicate vegan who just shudders at the sight of this horrible stuff, but
Right.
because it's wrong what's happening to animals. So, for instance, there's a book study group that I'm part of that's planning a finale celebration, potluck dinner. Somebody invited everybody to
Mhm.
her house. And so, as always, and there is another vegan in the group as well as someone who's vegetarian, at least one person who's vegetarian. And both of them are really great, cool people, but very big on not judging, not pushing, not making things uncomfortable. And so I took the email route where I just said, hey, this is where I'm coming from. you know, we've got a vegan and a vegetarian, at least one vegetarian in the group. And even then, I didn't say, let's make our gathering totally vegan. I didn't say that.
Hmm.
But I said, I hope that we can make this gathering as vegan friendly as possible, vegan friendly, and in parentheses, really animal friendly. Because again, I don't care about me. I'm not advocating for me in this situation. I'm advocating for the animals, and that can be a tricky distinction. Like one parallel example, I had a friend years ago in Boston who was getting married, and I was going to the wedding, and she was so sweet. Not a vegan person, but she of course knew that I'm vegan. And she said to me, "Oh, we're going to make sure to have some vegan options because I want to make sure that, people like you are comfortable and have something to eat." And again, it's a kind gesture. And so I want to respond in appreciation for like that, like baseline level of consideration. But again, I would much rather that she do it thinking about the animals rather than
Hmm.
the people. And even, one other example, even at the local meditation center where I used to be a part of, their gatherings were explicitly vegetarian, not fully vegan. One of the key people there is a vegan, but even in the languaging, it was about like we have some members who are vegan or
Right.
vegetarian, so
Right.
please respect them. Nothing about
Right.
ahimsa, nothing about the animals. So yeah, for me, I guess the point that I wanted to make again for myself as much as anybody else is that I think we vegans, especially when we're on the more agreeable side, we don't like when people don't like us. And we don't like when people respond negatively to the things that we say. And
Hmm.
so when we're in the process of carrying this vegan message or just representing the animals out in the world, we take it as a failure or as a negative sign if we express that message and it's not well received. We
Hmm.
think, oh, I failed. That didn't work. That was not the way to go. And I think the thing that I do my best to keep in mind is to remember that's not a helpful gauge because I need to just know people are not going to welcome this message. No one is going to welcome this message because everybody's participating in this animal agribusiness. So I can't take the fact that, oh, somebody makes me feel awkward or someone says like, why did you have to say that? Or someone says you're just too much. That's, like that's to be expected. And just to know that no one's going to want to hear that message because we're asking people to change what they're eating. Like how much more essential and personal does it get? And I get it too. I wouldn't want anyone telling me what to eat.
Right.
And I wouldn't do that if it weren't for the animals. If it
Right.
weren't for the animals. Like I had Dr. Faraz Harsini on the show, and I just loved how he put it. He was like, I'm an introvert. He's like, the last thing in the world I want to do is go around telling people what to eat. But who else is gonna, we're all the animals have. Like
Yeah.
we're all they have. Like if we don't do it, who's gonna do it? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's just been on my mind a lot. And then of course there's the whole strategy aspect of it. Like when am I just wasting my breath? When is it just not going to accomplish anything or do a disservice to the cause? But again, I feel like we, or at least I, can sometimes default to that assumption much sooner than is really warranted. Like, oh, it's just
Hmm.
not worth it here because and we gauge that by the response, which again is always going to be negative because no one's going to want to hear it.
Hmm.
So we're kind of left with, well, what do we do, and what balance do we find of living in the world and having friends and being just like a normal person who functions to being the vegan who just can't not talk about stuff all the time. Yeah, interesting
Yeah.
to navigate.
Yeah. And there's also we've talked before about kind of like I really don't see the world through a utilitarian lens for the most part. But there is a question here when you're talking about, why, if you're looking at an event, for example, is if the end effect is you're going for the same end effect either way, where you would prefer this party or this potluck to be predominantly vegan or all vegan. Are you going to, is that going to be more likely if you come from a accommodate me kind of perspective rather than let me tell you why it's so ethically important that you do this?
Yep.
If like how are you going to get more vegan food on the table and that's
Yep.
going to displace the animal food and, therefore do more good in the world for the animals? So I think that kind of question of, yeah, framing it as an accommodation for my special little thing. If that leads to a better outcome for the animals, then maybe that is a trade-off worth
Yeah.
making.
Yeah.
And so I think as much as we might bristle at that and feel like, well, this is kind of cheating because I really should be out there educating on the cause and be a little more righteous in my behavior. It's like, well, what are you doing? What's the end in mind? What's the real goal here? So I know that if I make a stink about how I need to be accommodated, there's going to be more food for me. Whereas if I make a big ethical pledge, maybe there'll be like one vegan dish or something. Like, because
True. Yeah.
people, that's the evolutionary psychology of it. Like, don't come and tell me that I'm a bad person for how I eat and what I want to eat and what I'm planning to put on the table for this potluck. But oh, if you need me to help you, you
Right.
need me to accommodate you, then let me show you what a good person I am by doing
Right.
that. So it's a little, you know,
That's a great point. Yep, that makes total sense because we're giving, like you said, we're giving them a chance to show how
right.
beneficent they are, how generous
Exactly.
they are, how wonderful they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, where
Yeah,
people
yeah,
really shut down if you come for their beliefs and their value systems, and as soon because there is probably a part of them that understands that, it's not great that I'm eating animals, and there's most people have a little bit of dissonance because they love their dog, but they eat the pig. It's somewhere in their consciousness, somewhere deep and unexamined, where they recognize that there's some cognitive dissonance there. And so if you start to highlight it and, nudge it and rub a little salt in it, yeah, they can get very defensive and move the opposite direction from where you want them to go.
right, right. Yeah, you're right. Keeping in mind the status, the status piece is so
Yeah.
crucial. And in fact, the parallel that comes to mind was there was somebody during the COVID years and the lockdowns and ubiquitous masking. There was someone who wrote a book on called Face Masks in One Lesson, and essentially it was on how to get through your day and get through life without putting on a mask.
Hmm.
And he made exactly the same point that you did,
Right.
like
Right.
don't get in there and start spouting constitutional arguments about freedom.
Right.
Talk about you can't safely wear a mask
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that'll enable you to be able to go out in the world, do the things you want to do. It'll have the effect of raising consciousness because people will at least see someone not wearing a mask.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's very, very interesting. I will say that being a vegan has definitely taught me a lot about psychology and just
Yeah.
humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gives you a little window into all of these kind of just the ways in which the tribe operates. And,
A
people are
hundred percent. Yeah.
just so protective of their beliefs and so like, yeah, it's a little scary when you start to really dig into it.
It's really scary. I mean, for me, what it really brought home just being a vegan, and I've been vegan since 2011, so 14, coming up on 14 years. And for me, it just really brought home the power of convention. I know
Hmm.
certain people, and my sister, I consider her, I'm pretty sure she's not listening to this, but I consider
Hmm.
her a prime example of this, where she's health conscious, she's compassionate, she's smart, she's pro-vegan in the sense that I think she believes on at least some level the health aspects of a whole food plant-based diet. But as long as non-vegan is the norm, she's just gonna do that. She's just not gonna
Yeah.
shift as long
Yeah.
as it's the convention. And I've seen that same playbook or just framework in action in so many other areas too. Like whatever the so-called common wisdom is, people
Right.
are so reluctant or maybe even just unable to buck it. I don't know what it is.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an important point that it's those of us who kind of have embraced veganism and are comfortable with being outside of the conventional wisdom of things and going outside the mainstream and swimming the other direction. That's probably not limited to the domain of veganism in our lives. It also applies to a willingness not to mask in public like you're talking about, or not to take the conventional I'm not going to get the cancer screenings when you're supposed to get the cancer screenings, this sort of approach to just overall health kind of thing. There is this, either you're sort of an iconoclast or you're not. And obviously, that's not a perfect Venn diagram. Like, not everybody who's vegan would probably consider themselves outside of the norm everywhere else. But I think a lot of us do, and we probably underestimate how that makes being vegan easier, more intuitive. There's less of that internal struggle that people like your sister are experiencing, where I really want to do this, but I'm not willing to pay that cost of being the pariah in the social context. And so that's going to win the day. Whereas I don't really care as much about that, and I never have, and I don't care about it in lots of areas of my life. So we want to make sure that we're sort of acknowledging that's just an additional protective factor for, walking outside the lines on veganism in addition to everything else.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so interesting because I do, in my perception, like the vegans I know, it can go both ways. Like there are the vegans who question this and, expand that questioning to all realms. Like what else have I been lied to about? And what else
Right.
have I been told that isn't true and doesn't add up? And then I do think I at least know a significant number of vegans who it's like this issue with veganism, this is kind of all the bucking the system that they had in them.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of clinging to all the other semblances of fitting in and just
Yeah.
not
That
being even more just craving that tribalism and belonging.
Yep, I know a lot of those people too, where this is like, yeah, you've already taken this big risk, and so that just causes you to double down on I'm normal the rest of the time.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's not in my makeup at all.
Yeah.
I just
Well,
am not wired that way.
yeah, yeah. And I do think, I mean, for a lot of the people that I talk to on the podcast and just in general, I think, yeah, a lot of them, and I'll include myself in this category, but people who always kind of felt like outliers or people who
Yep.
always felt like they didn't quite fit in, then well, okay, it was easier to just embrace one more area where they didn't fit in. But I remember that was a consideration for me when I went vegan. I remember saying to somebody, it was at a vegan meetup group, but I remember saying to her, like, my goodness, the last thing I need is just one more thing that disconnects me from the rest of society. And she was
Yeah.
like, I don't want to be connected to society. And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. But this brings me to a question that I received that is somewhat on this topic around checking for our own biases. Because obviously, a lot of people want to fit in, but then there's also a danger for people who do buck the system and do rebel in some fashion, whether they become so identified with that status of being a rebel, being somebody who always goes the other way. Like that's also a form of bias and
Hmm. Hmm.
not a pure motive. So yeah, what's your take on the question of just bias in general and like how can we check our own biases when we're seeking truth?
Man, yeah, that is. That's a huge topic. I don't think there's any great answer to it. I think by definition, we're unaware of our own bias. Or we, privilege our own bias. And, we've talked before. I don't know if it's been so much on the posse, but we've talked in other contexts about how a lot of the programming that we receive from mass media, et cetera, it's got a built-in oppositional stance to it. So there's this anticipation that, yeah, most people are going to go along with narrative A, but then you're going to have a bunch of people who feel like they need to be the rebels who disagree with the dominant narrative, and so we need to accommodate them too. So the main example that you'll see of this is the origins of COVID story. Was it, a Wuhan wet market escaped situation? I just saw some other article the other day that it's raccoon dogs now, that's what's linked to the zoonotic origin of COVID. Or if you reject that narrative, you're going to go with the lab leak narrative. And that, a lot of people have sort of pointed to the narrative building around lab leak as very particularly designed to accommodate that secondary group of people who need to feel like they're rebels, who need to feel like I'm not as easily persuaded by what the news tells me to think, and I'm going to do my own research and come to my own conclusions. And so those two groups together probably captures, 98% of the population. And so then there's the question of the other 2% who, are they really free of bias? Of course not. They still, especially when we're consuming all of our information about any topic that we're interested in a completely personalized, algorithmically driven way these days. So, nobody's going to the stacks in the library and pouring through journals anymore and kind of coming to some novel, robust conclusion that is theirs and theirs alone. They are entering certain search terms into search engines that are learning as they go as to what you're interested in and what bias you seem to have, and then being fed of that more information that confirms those biases. You're following people that probably tend to agree with you or agree with you on a lot of things. So we're all just living in bubbles of our own making. And it can feel very, no, I've stress tested my bubble and I've seen evidence to the contrary of all of these other things. And so I'm very convicted that my way is right. And a huge part of my journey has been to hold that ever more lightly, because I have watched myself be utterly convicted of one thing or another so many times in my life, and then to, really be confronted with evidence later, or have life experience later, or see it in my clients that just complicates that, and or completely flips it upside down. And it's happened enough now that when I find myself getting all on my high horse and all zealous about something, like, no, 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 this is the way it is. Like, you're full of crap. Like, your information's coming from the wrong sources. I just I do my best to check myself, and it's a kind of an energy that rises in you when you feel really defensive about your perspective and your being right, including about
Oh, I never
veganism.
feel that way, Jen.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And so when I noticed that, and I just had a really great conversation with some friends the other day about this, like, that's the tell. That's where you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. Like, especially if you are in a position like counseling, or where you're holding authority and ready to use that authority to persuade people. I think that is why the ACA has those ethical guidelines in place, not to impose your personal beliefs on the counseling relationship. It is a very important value to, yeah, you can be in an absolute certainty of what it is that you think everybody needs to do. But you could be wrong, and you probably are. So,
Except when
yeah.
it comes to veganism.
Except veganism,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I've pondered that question a lot of, yeah, there are those two, generally speaking, there are often two ready-made categories. There's this or that. And then I I often, in whatever realm, whether it's political or health or whatever, I'm often in like that third realm. I don't know if it's 2% or bigger than
Hmm.
that, but I mean, for instance, with health and nutrition, obviously not the mainstream conventional stuff, but nor am I into the crazy out there, in my view, unsubstantiated, holistic, alternative stuff, which I
Right.
think often,
Right.
there are so many like just frauds and gimmicks and
Oh, totally. I'm
manipulation
still,
out there. So I'm, that third category: whole food, plant-based, wholesome food, lifestyle, exercise. And so I've seen myself, fall into that category and countless other realms, like politically. I was never strongly identified with either of the two main parties. I was more independent minded, libertarian minded. And so when it comes to any issue, I've noticed, wow, I can pretty predictably fall into that third category. And if my
mhm.
behavior and my opinions are predictable, then what does that mean
Right. Right.
about truth? Like,
And if they're predictable, they're not just predictable to you, they're predictable
yeah.
to Google and Twitter and
Oh, a
Facebook
hundred
and
percent. Yeah, but if
whatever else. Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's very interesting because like you mentioned, we're in a world of algorithms and very curated messaging. And it's
Hmm.
tough to know precisely how curated our own worlds are.
Yeah.
I don't do social media, so by many standards my exposure is limited, but I'm sure for me, it's even much more curated than I realize.
And that's the thing. We all think that we're, outside of it. We all think that we have this special capacity to see through it and to protect ourselves against it. And that's the biggest bias of all is that like I'm
Right.
stronger than the psyop bias.
Right, right. Well, advertising is a perfect example of that. We all like to think like we're smart. We're not going to be fooled by an ad, but advertising research shows ads work. Advertising
Yep.
works. It can't
Yep.
predictably work in one person all the time, but statistically, it works.
Yep.
And you're part of that statistic. Yeah, so it's very interesting. But one area where I definitely have some bias is around, which is somewhat a taboo topic, but this whole topic of psych meds and
Oh, sure.
this, psychiatric medication. And I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't have that body of knowledge or expertise. And so it's interesting kind of exploring that field and just wondering, okay, how much, like, I'm just, again, my natural inclination, my natural proclivity, maybe bias is the appropriate word, but it's toward just the body, nature,
Hmm.
um, things working themselves out without intervention of, chemically concocted substances. And but but who knows? That's my baseline. Other
Right.
people have a different baseline, which is just
Right.
much more experimental, much more like, yeah, let's try some stuff. Let's see what happens. Oh, this seems to be like they don't have sort of that foundational principle of I
Mm.
guess in some ways, I mean, I definitely don't practice this 100%, but I am somewhat a purist about the body, and other people are just much less so, much more willing to try things and do things and inject things,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're fine.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's just again, it's a very different starting point. And so that has lots of ramifications.
Yeah. And again, it's that sort of that rising bile that you experience. Like I follow a lot of kind of alternative psych people and, people who agree with me for the most part on robust skepticism towards psych meds. And, I'm kind of used to that being my info stream
Mm,
is like I see a manifesto or a tweet thread from somebody, I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's how things are. And then, but there's a couple of people that I follow who I agree with on a lot of other things, other in psych Twitter or other areas where there's overlap. And occasionally they'll post like a defense of psych meds, or they'll post,
Mm.
some some perspective that really challenges that assumption that I have that, oh yeah, everybody here agrees with me and we're all right and we're all in our tribe and it feels good to be in the tribe. And I have this moment where it's like, well, I really respect other things that they say, but they're way out of line on this. Like they totally don't know what they're talking about. And I have this moment of like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. I'm like, okay, like it's maybe not necessary that I take their position seriously. Like it's kind of like catching those moments of our own cognitive bias and our own problematic convictions. It's not necessarily a prescription that you then need to sit down and really take their argument seriously because maybe they're saying something that you are missing or need to agree with. I mean, possibly that's there. I think it's more about just let's not dismiss them entirely because they've arrived at this through a separate process and through their own set of biases and their own research. So it's not like, oh, I can't make sense of this unless I totally agree with it. It's they are still an intelligent person who has thought carefully and intelligently about this topic, and we can agree to disagree. And maybe I will find myself in the future having more agreement with them than I do right now, or maybe they will have more agreement with me. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can continue to like check that tendency that I have to throw them out of the guano ring because they've said something that doesn't comport with my deepest held bias. That's kind of the practice that I'm in right now. And I mean, it's
Mm.
hard. We have strong tribal instincts where it's like, oh no, dude, you like that's totally wrong. You are stupid. You don't belong in my tribe.
Right, right. You're not supposed to believe that. Like, didn't you get the didn't you get the
Right.
memo? Like,
Right,
how
right. I
did you
guess
end
I
up
was wrong
here?
about you, like
Right,
I thought you were one of us, but I guess not. And so
right.
there's just such strong tendency in human psychology to go there. And social media has weaponized that to, plutonium levels. And so I think whatever level of attention and mindfulness we can bring to that tendency is going to improve things somewhat for us and for those relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so confusing. And I just feel like the longer I live, the more I just find myself immersed in one taboo subject after another to the
It's
extent where I'm
amazing
afraid
how
to
that
say anything
happens.
about anything.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the things I'm most interested in thinking about, the reason they're interesting is because they're so pervasive or so controversial. And at the same time, I don't want to alienate, the mass majority of people who have a
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
viewpoint.
I was just talking to somebody yesterday about that topic on the kind of the mind-body connection, the mind-body disease connection, and how that is still entering into that space in any kind of serious way is just completely not allowed. Like you can't have a serious conversation about, eh, are there personality traits that are more aligned? Even though there are entire journals, there's an entire literature, there's tons of research out there, but it is a no-go zone, certainly within the plant-based world and anywhere else that considers itself so-called evidence-based. The line around what constitutes that evidence and how far we can push it or challenge it or question it or bring in other kinds of arguments is very defined, even though it's very informal. Nobody sat down and said, there are these things that you can't talk about. But talking about a mind-body connection with disease is tantamount to talking about astrology. Within these kinds of circles, it's seen as just as illegitimate and out of line. So I think it's very interesting. I think over time these things can move very, very slowly, but when we're in the moment and we're sort of persuaded that there's a right way and a wrong way to do this, then there's not a whole lot of wiggle room around that.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting. And on that topic, I mean, what's coming to mind for me is Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist who created quantum
Sure.
mechanics, he made the comment that, these physical objects that we see that seem
Hmm.
so solid and so tangible and so real, they're actually, a mass of swirling electrons, none of which can be pinpointed to any
Hmm.
given position at any point in time. And really, what we conceive as this very fixed, solid object is more equivalent to a thought
Hmm.
in how
Hmm.
we perceive it in the world. And when I read that years ago, I just remember thinking to myself, well, that's so interesting because if objects are the equivalent of thoughts, then what's the effect of all of these toxic negative thoughts that sometimes
Hmm.
infiltrate my brain? And it kind of made me think maybe I should take a more serious view of all of those things. And at the same time, I personally am pretty skeptical. I mean, I'm not skeptical of the mind body connection per se, but of, for instance, cancer being the result of repressed trauma. That
Hmm. Hmm.
that when it kind of gets into that level of connection, I'm skeptical. And so where I find myself defaulting to a lot of the time is, well, I don't even need to have an opinion on this. I don't need to have a view.
Exactly.
Nobody's
Exactly.
asking for what's the Chrissy Benson,
Right.
position on this issue. Nobody cares. And,
Right.
I don't even have to decide for myself. I can just
Hmm.
remain curious and interested. And with the mind body issues, where I lean toward that is, open-ended question. Who knows? I'm skeptical. But even though I'm skeptical, I certainly believe in many cases there's a great deal of value to be had in working through these issues that you've
Hmm.
noticed, in your emotional world. And whether or not that translates into curing your cancer or curing your high blood pressure, I have no idea, but I think it's probably a good place for you to focus your energy just for your own overall well-being. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, having the no opinion has been probably my most helpful option in recent years.
Yeah, I think it's so hard for us to stay in that I don't know space. Like, it's just humans in general are not great, especially in the West, at just saying, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. There's a lot of interesting work going back centuries now with quantum physics that we just kind of put out of our mind as, well, that's just all what Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. And here we are in the real world. And so I can see these material objects, and therefore all of that silly quantum physics talk is just talk. And then when we do try to delve into it, we have that tendency to, well, I guess I need to figure out what the answer is, and I need to have a position, and I need to be able to say, yeah, absolutely, everything is energy, or, oh no, that's all just bunk and craziness. And instead of just being like, you know what? It's big world. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's so much we don't understand. And I'm going to hold that lightly and say, I need to live life and I need to make decisions. But as I get confronted with things that are thought provoking or mysterious, then I'll kind of
Mm.
keep the stuff in the back of my mind and let it inform me a little bit. So, and that's exactly how I approach the whole kind of mind body question. You have these incredible case studies. I wrote about one of them in my book where somebody has dissociative personality disorder, and one of the alters is blind, and one of them isn't. There's activity in the visual cortex in one of those alters, and not in the other one. Like that, so
Amazing.
there's
Yeah.
definitely something that is capable of governing the material reality that is happening outside of it. Something emotional, psychological is going on.
Right. Right.
But am I then going to say, because of that case study, and in even the way that we frame this, like, well, there's evidence that there is this powerful mind-body connection. Well, yeah, there is, but there's also evidence that there's not. It just depends where you're looking and how you're framing things. And we just have this very confrontational, adversarial orientation toward information and arguments in life, and everything is an argument, and everything has to have this position. And yeah, more and more, I'm just, isn't it okay? Can't we just be uncertain? Can't we just be in uncertainty and stay open and not have to pigeonhole ourselves into a position that is probably going to evolve and change over time anyway.
Yeah, yeah. It's easier said than done, of course. And I
Yeah.
mean, obviously we all want to know the answer. We all
Yeah.
like that's what curiosity is you want to find out the answer. You're not
Yeah.
you're not content with just being uncertain and it's the desire for certainty that drives the curiosity. So I think it's this paradox that we have to exist in earnestly seeking the truth, knowing that we'll never find it. And I
Hmm.
remember like calling to mind the introduction to the China study. T. Colin Campbell wrote something along the lines about how no, he doesn't claim to have figured it all out or to be presenting any, big T truth here, but for purposes of our limited human existence, we have to assess the available information and make some choices in our lives. And
Totally.
based on this information, he came to the conclusion that it makes a whole lot of sense to not consume any animal products
Yep.
from a health perspective. And, you know, I love the way he introduced that body of evidence because it wasn't therefore this is what you should do. It was this is here's the information and
Right.
make your own choices at the same time certainly encourage people to make choices. Don't just keep the jury out to the extent that you don't make any decisions for yourself and just kind of go about the status quo as if nothing had changed. And then the whole issue of psych meds. I mean, we had one woman wrote in after sort of posing a question for Posse Talk, but mainly just sharing her experience about being on SSRI medication for 15 years, long time. And her doctor at the time had simply framed it to her as, you need this just like a diabetic needs insulin,
Hmm.
and she didn't question that. That was, of course, before she had gone vegan and before she learns that even a lot of diabetics don't have to be diabetic and they don't need insulin in the sense that there isn't another way to more
Yeah.
effectively like reverse their type 2 diabetes.
Type 2. Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
she weaned herself off those meds and has been off them for 5 years and feels a lot better and is happy she kind of made it out of that world. But then I, of course, you hear anecdotal evidence, plenty of people who take these prescriptions and um, feel that it helps. And I'm certainly not going to argue with anyone's experience. And I also am so hesitant to tread in what is a very taboo subject. Do you even want to like touch that subject with a 10-foot pole?
I mean, I think that's pretty much all that can be said about it.
Yeah.
It is, there are lots of people who believe that these are life-saving medications. And, I think again, this comes into the question of, at what point are you imposing your values? At what point are you taking the lived experience of a client seriously, or of even if it's not a client, just people out in the world who have this relationship with these medications. I think it's too easy to just say, well, I read Robert Whitaker, and I've read these other things, and I have seen the light, and you are harming yourself. Like, I think you can believe that, just like the China study comes to its conclusions, and that based on your research and your understanding of the question. But then there's this bridge to, and then you're going to go kind of impose that value system and that set of understanding on the world at large. And if you're in a position of authority over people, I think you have to be very, very humble about that. And, it's not something that we're good at. Let me see if I can find it quickly. There was a great quote that I just came across the other day about, and, it's a tricky thing because you don't want to be so in that zone of, well, I would never, Yeah, okay, this is about psychotherapy in particular. In any effective psychotherapy, the client's lived experience is more important than the therapist's theoretical training by orders of magnitude. Anyone who suggests the reverse is drawn to the power imbalance inherent in invalidating the vulnerable, not to the job of healer. So it's a strong statement, right? It's strong position. But then you get into that question of, does that apply if your client is a raging racist? Does it apply? Is there no limit anywhere where their lived experience needs to be corrected in some sense because you are in this position of authority and perhaps they are doing themselves or other people harm in some maybe not a imminently fatal sort of way, but there's harm being done from your perspective. So
Yeah.
it's such difficult questions because is the line there for, well, they're eating animals, they're harming animals? Doesn't seem like it is, but is the line there for psych meds? Probably not. Yeah, where is it? It's definitely somewhere. And I think all we can do is kind of continue to evaluate case by case and try to stay present and in dialogue with other people who are wrestling with these things. Well, technology interrupts us again. I don't remember exactly what I was ranting about, but
You were talking about the line between
yeah,
intervening,
yeah,
in the given that power inequality between the counselor and the client.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
there is a line where it is appropriate to intervene and correct the client's lived experience at some point, but that that
It's
line
just,
is,
yeah,
yeah,
there's just an inferred superiority that comes with that.
yeah,
It's
100%.
it's like
Yeah.
I listen to me. I need to correct you because you are out of line. You misunderstand that. And the comfort, it's more than the question about comfort level with being in that place of superiority. That itself is an ethical question. Like, where is there a trade-off of sufficient harm being done that I can then sort of violate that ethical principle of there's something inherently superior about me. I'm not more superior about you than you because I've read more on this
Yeah, no,
topic,
client
you know?
autonomy is
Yeah.
sacrosanct
Y-
in, the
Yeah.
ACA Code of Ethics and
Yeah.
just on a humanistic level. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And whether
very
it's clients in a counseling relationship or anywhere, with our friends, with anybody, just this kind of that humanistic question of who am I to elevate myself above you in this exalted moral position?
right.
I have read more books and I have thought about this more, and therefore let me tell you what you need to do. It's just, again,
Right.
as is always the case in our Posse Talk conversations, we're just in the realm of sort of philosophical meandering. We don't have concrete solutions and answers, but I do think you have to maintain some sort of ethical vigilance and attention to this stuff and continue to talk it over with colleagues and friends and not get yourself siloed into a position where you're drinking your own Kool-Aid and just like really letting yourself become numb to that position of power that you're putting yourself in regularly over vulnerable people. That's risky.
Right. That's risky and wrong. And not only that, often we try to put ourselves in that position of power and it doesn't work anyway. It
Hmm.
doesn't work in winning an argument to say, trust me, I've read more about this than you
Right,
do.
right.
So trust, that's
Yeah,
not going to get us
yeah. You
very
see my
far.
diploma on the wall there? Like
Yeah.
that should just make you shut up, Like, no, that's
Yeah.
not how this
Yeah.
works. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I will invite our viewers and listeners to share their experiences of what has worked because even though I don't claim to have solutions, I know people have come up with some really creative, effective ways of going about their advocacy and having conversations that are effective and illuminating for both people and ideally also enjoyable. Imagine
Yeah.
that. So, yeah, I invite people to share their experiences or strategies in that regard too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. More cues always welcome on Posse
Yes.
Talk.
Yes. All right, Jen. Well, as usual, we covered a lot of territory. Again,
Leaving no
we at
question.
least explored.
Yes, yes, we explored and left everything unanswered as usual, but that's just what we do. So,
It's our specialty. Yes,
yes.
yes. So, but we have a lot of fun doing it. So,
Yeah,
That makes it worth
definitely.
it. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, as usual, we'll close every episode by taking 30 seconds of silence for all the suffering animals, human and non-human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Jen, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.
Thanks. Oh my goodness.